From time to time, I like to do a video and make it a review video. And I do this because, as I've previously stated, I want people to leave reviews for me. I prefer them to be good reviews, honestly. I don't want a bad review. And I've talked about how most of the time people feel compelled to leave a review for negative reasons. And I urge the importance of also doing positive reviews. This is not a positive review at all. This is a review of Tide Pods. Tide Pods. The things that kids put in their mouths and they chew on and they kill themselves, or whatever the case may be. I don't know what happens. I don't know what happened with the Tide Pods, because I ignore that stuff. I think it's crazy when you start making a big deal about it. Kids are eating Tide Pods and they're getting hurt. I don't know. It just like fuels the fire. It's like the kids are looking for 15 minutes of fame. Kids all over America are like, yeah, they ate the Tide Pods. Okay, no, Tide Pods are not for that. Let me tell you what I feel Tide Pods are for. Tide Pods are for people that are traveling. Okay, you travel for work and you don't want to carry around a big old thing of liquid laundry detergent. So you go buy some Tide Pods and then you go to the laundromat or whatever and you throw a little Tide Pod in there. Now, I think that's what Tide Pods are for. They could be for anything else. Whatever need you have met. Now, for me, let me tell you my background with things like Tide Pods. So, in the Army, it's very frequently you will travel and go to the Army schools and stuff like that. And I used to always buy. I wasn't buying the actual Tide Pod brand and stuff back then. There used to be some different brands that were more like they'd have more of a powdery substance on the inside. They didn't have the liquid gel. The liquid gel is always kind of creeped me out. You grab it because you're like, is this going to bust? And if it busts, I got to clean it up. But if it's a powder, you don't really worry about it busting because it'd just be like powder and you don't have like this, I don't know, like that gel inside of a Tide Pod, to me, it feels like demonic. Like, and I don't even know where that comes from, but like when I feel it, it feels like evil. I'm like, this is an evil Tide Pod. I'm not comfortable right now. But that's just the way I feel. Now, it works great for that, especially like Iraq and Afghanistan. I always used them. The PX had a brand that I would use, and I never had a problem with it. They were great. You know, you really want your clothes to smell good, you put 2 of them in there. But here recently, I bought the Tide Pods, and of course the good one, the Tide brand, when I moved into my apartment. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to mess with pouring the cup in and stuff no more. I want to just try this. Like single man, right? Like single man life, Tide Pod for life. Now, what happened is I did like 10 or 15 loads of laundry, and I started seeing like these like dark stains on my clothing. And you couldn't even tell what color they were. They were like bluish, black, but they were like random. And like on this, even on this shirt I have on, to me it looked like oil. Someone said to me, "Did you drop food on your shirt?" And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And then finally I figured it out because my son came in the room and he's like, "Dad, look at this. My shirt, it has dried plastic on it." And like back on the back of his shirt is like plastic melted to his t-shirt. And then I was like, oh, you know what that is? That's the Tide Pod. That's the little plastic on the Tide Pod. So I had already, for whatever crazy reason, I kind of bought in bulk, and I'm against that generally. But I had a Tide Pod that was like a 30 pack, and I'd used half of it. So when I went back to the store, I bought one of those big 74 load Tide Pods. And I was like, well, heck, I have 74 more Tide Pods. I have to use them. I'm not going to throw them away. They're expensive. So what I started doing is I'll heat up the water in the faucet, and I'll drop the Tide Pod in a cup. I have a little Dixie cup that I drop it in, and I run hot water in it, and I'll let it soak for 5 minutes, and I let it dissolve real good, and then I'll take a knife, and I'll stir it up. Now, even when you stir it up, the little plastic's not always completely melting, but it's doing a pretty good job. And then instead of pouring it directly into the load, I'll pour it into the little loader. That way it's catching that plastic in there. So that's what I'm doing to get through my Tide Pods. Now, quite honestly, because of the fact that if we're going to talk like a star rating, I have to be very harsh on this, just due to the simple fact that it's ruining clothes. If you ruin clothes, if you have a nice shirt or something, and it stains or it's ruined and it has plastic dried to it, it ruins it. So that really like decreases the value of this Tide Pod. And I'm going to give a Tide Pod, and I hate to go lower than like, you know what? I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be fair, and I'm going to call it like a 2.5 to 3 star rating. And the only reason I'm going to be fair about this, I would say a 1, okay? But like I said at the beginning of the video, the Tide Pod serves its purpose of being like on the go. If you're going to travel, say you're going to rent a beach house, okay? Like I'm on my way to Pensacola right now. If I was doing a beach house in Pensacola for a week with my family and I was going to do laundry, I would get Tide Pods and I'd take that with me. So for that reason alone, we're going to go ahead and call it a 2.5 or a 3 star. But I don't recommend them. If you're ever going to do laundry at home, just don't cut corners. Don't think Mr. Single Man going to cut corners. Get the good stuff. Whatever you choose to get, just don't get a Tide Pod. They're not good.